Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, theater, and entertainment. And today we are so lucky to be joined by Steve Basilone, who's the writer and director of Long Weekend. And I wanted to begin by talking about the writing process of this, because you've talked before about how you infamously hate rewriting and doing second and third drafts. So you really try to hone in on what that first draft is going to be. So how does that part of the process look really detailed in a different way for you, particularly in writing this film, in wanting to avoid having to do too many drafts of the script?
What like the process is like always evolving. It's kind of a living thing as I change. There's things I realize, what we talked about previous to starting this, like you just learn from like, oh, that didn't work as well. I'm not going to do that again. And I think I was a little bit spoiled for a long time because I had a writing partner, at least in the television arena and some features, for about 10 years. And like the thing I learned about that is like it was a filtration process. So every first draft kind of felt like more like a third or fourth draft because like I'd write something, she'd be like, "No, that's dumb. Let's do it this way," and then I do the same thing. So it was like everything that was like a snag, like a hangnail in the script, we'd smooth out, because there was another eyes on it all the time. So I feel like that is part of the reason that made me a little bit lazier, and I just like to. I guess the perfectionist, I just like want to get it and it lives in your brain. So just like, well, that's the way it has to be instead of some people just like love rewriting, like, well, I'll just re-break the whole thing. And I kind of it lives in my mind for long enough that it makes sense to me. And sometimes like those notes are necessary and you just have to like restructure a whole thing. But I prefer not to because, you start to cherish it and you start to like, I guess I'm a creature of habit. And so much like I would just take the same route to the grocery store every day. So like once I get that route in my brain narratively, it just makes sense to me. Did that answer the question?
It did, yeah. And in terms of the visual details and the way that you write those into the script for this project, knowing that you were going to be directing it, did you find yourself focusing in on some of the aesthetic choices a little bit in more of a detailed way earlier on than you would usually, just because you were already starting to think about how you were going to see this on screen eventually?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. But I think that was definitely it was more clear in this because I knew like this, I want to make this, and I wrote something that I thought was hopefully doesn't feel small. Hopefully, it feels a bigger story than it is. But it's there's a reason why Zoe's name is Vienna. It's because like looking at the character, it's a before sunrise, right? It's just two people talking essentially, but with like a twist because we've seen so many watered down versions of that movie done. We've seen like so many kind of masturbatory projects that are like, I'm doing my version of this, and sometimes they're cool, but a lot of times it's just those are master classes to a degree, and they're so charming, and the character development is so real and lived in, and the story evolves so much. So I know just me doing that version of like who gives a shit kind of, but like doing something like that where it's just really two people talking that I feel like I could tackle and bring life to, and the things that I hope that I am better at and excel at, that like just two people kind of responding organically to each other, and then add a twist to it so it just feels like it's not just one of those vanity projects where like I'm going to do the thing that I've seen somebody else do, but I'm going to put my own spin on it, which I know is basically what I did. But the idea was to try to give it, because the thing that the movies I love the best, at least in terms of rom-coms, are not like 27 Dresses, which are, fine. Runaway Bride, great, sure. But I like more like, Eternal Sunshine and About Time and Groundhog Day and Stranger Than Fiction, Ruby Sparks, the things that kind of have like either a sci-fi or a magical realism twist that kind of brings something more nuanced to it, that gives it another layer, I guess, that cross-pollinating genres. So that's kind of what I was trying to do here. Make it small, but feel bigger because there's something headier in there.
Well, it's interesting to hear you describe those as being a lot of your aesthetic choices for the types of things that you love to watch, particularly when you look at what you've done tonally, which was one of the things that I really loved about this film, is that you managed to have dramatic storylines and plot lines at the same time. There's like this great comedy element to it. There's a lot of romanticism and there's levity at the same time. And that feels very realistic because all of those things are intertwined in everyday life. And was that something where you were consciously thinking about the way that you wanted to interweave those tones together throughout the writing process and then in directing it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I for me, I there's a place for it, obviously, but more often than not, whenever I watch anything, television or film or even theater, that is an enormous Knives Out mug. It is like you could take a swim in that. That is like a
Yeah.
jacuzzi. I love that. But I think anything I watch, anything that's just like drama with a capital D, that is just like so heavy. It's like, what fucking world is this? What reality is this? Because for me, I feel like I don't know. I am always one to do like a treacle cutter to like undercut vulnerability or undercut tension or undercut, any sort of sadness. And I think those because those things are not mutually exclusive. It is all, I mean, it's like a soundbite that I've said a bunch in doing this stuff, but like some of the hardest times I've laughed are like at funerals, because it is just such, you're so much in the red. It's the peaks and the valleys, and I think you just need that release. So like, yeah, and that's also what I'm comfortable with. I spent 10 years writing sitcoms. I mean, I basically have a house from dick jokes, and that's cool. So, but that's what I'm comfortable with, and especially with this cast, everybody is so funny. The only person who's not really done comedy work is Finn, but like he is such a facile, a skilled actor that like I kept on like realizing that he was like I referred to him as comedic tofu because like if you put whatever ingredient or element you put him with, he kind of like becomes that and takes it on, and like he's just such a facile like talented actor. So that's if you have all those tools in your belt, like use them. And I also just feel like this, a story like this, and when anytime you get any sort of love story, it can feel like too maudlin. It can feel like um, too heavy. And I feel like I wanted, that's not any sort of the romance I've had. The romance I have had is like always chaotic because it's like, why I feel nuts because what a crazy thing to go through. But it's usually like giddy and silly and fun and you're laughing a lot. And that's part of the joy. And there was like one thing that like I know a couple people it was like a real dividing line. There's one moment in the script in the movie. It was a real dividing line. Some people are like, we don't need that. That's a little blue. And other people are like, I fucking love that, and that's why I want to do this. Whereas the moment where like he's trying to sleep more before they go on their picnic. I don't know if you remember this. And then he's like, just give me 5 more minutes. She's like, okay, or I could go for some butthole. And she like just teases him and just like tries to touch his butt. And I don't know. I mean, it's just such a small moment. And does it matter narratively? No. But I think it's like, to me, it's like, I think that's shit we don't see a lot in, especially American cinema and television. We don't see that playfulness. Like, I feel like intimacy and sexuality is usually just done like so lasciviously, so salaciously. And it's not like funny and goofy, which I think is the best way for it to be a lot of times. I mean, there's different places. Obviously, everything exists. There's a Kinsey scale. It's fluid. But I think that's something I wanted to bring to this. That there's even in like the sadness, in the romance, in the despair, there's still like always room for and naturally like room for like a laugh and a smile. And I think that just it's the Mary Poppins. It's that spoonful of sugar that just makes all of the stuff that can be like, huh, still feel like buoyant.
I also think it's such a testament to the writing, the directing, and the performances that there are people that think that there's a lot of improvisation in the film, even though it is scripted and it was very specifically detailed in terms of what the actions in the scenes were going to be. But I know that in directing, you also gave the actors a lot of freedom in playing around with, different emotional tones and different directions that the scene could go on. So was that something that was always important to you and that you knew that you were going to direct in that style of having a really clear foundation in terms of what you'd written in the script, knowing what the action points were going to be, but then also the necessity of having that freedom, particularly with this cast and the skills that they bring?
Yeah. I mean, I was so lucky to have like Finn was the only actor that I didn't really know. I mean, I was familiar with his work, but like I am a big old fraidy cat and I don't love scary shit. So like I have never really watched American Horror Story. So I know the things that he's been like, his Emmy nominated work. I've like seen clips, but like I was like, I don't know. There's things jumping out. It's not for me. But like Zoe, I knew in passing, and everybody else was like, it was just a real like, let's get the band back together. My MacGruber sequence of like, come on, get in the van from like, Wendy from the Goldbergs and Jim Rash from Community and Damon and Casey from Happy Endings. So like they were all, that was part of the joy, just like having people come and work and having that comfort and just, again, like I said, like if you have like these thoroughbreds, like let them fucking run. So I knew it was such a great confidence for me to know that like whatever I put on the page, that 90% of the time they could make make better, make funnier, make more elegant, more organic, more lived in, you know. And that's the thing. Like I feel that's what kind of makes something feel special when it feels like it's off the cuff. And a lot of times, like you know, every a lot of that shit is written. Like a lot of those jokes are written. A lot of that goofiness is written in. But you know, you write like, for example, like that where they're doing the animal kisses in the montage and they're doing the snake kiss. Like you wrote, you know, I wrote that in, and it was before, it wasn't a montage previously, but it's like you know, you can write like they do a kiss like a snake, but it's like what they bring to it, and that like that joy and that frenetic and that charm is like you can't. That's lightning in a bottle. So, you know, I think for like especially like a romance to really work, you need to like fall in love with them as an audience as they do themselves as characters. So any way to like, and this movie just doesn't work without that because it hinges on such a like a tiny little fulcrum that like one or two scenes don't work, then the whole movie doesn't work. And if you're not invested in their relationship, then it's really doesn't work. You can have a bunch of jokes, but who cares if that doesn't work? So I think that was important to me, just to like allow them to be playful in a way that that just made you want to be a part of it. Like I feel like there's like a couple of good laughs in the movie, but I think there's a bunch of smiles. And I feel like that's like it just feels like a kind of a warm hug sometimes, and that's the thing I look for. Like you know, I love Beginners. That's one of my favorite movies. I think it's a master class. It like tells a story across three separate timelines, just you know seamlessly, and it also has magical realism and breaks the fourth wall as a talking dog. And there's also a history lesson about the LGBT community in LA in the 50s, and it all just works somehow. And I think that's a testament to all those performers. I mean, it's also wonderfully crafted, but like just allowing they're so you're so invested in all their relationships. And I don't know what that process was like, but I feel like it just feels like if you don't care about them as the characters, then nothing else matters. So yeah, I just wanted to that's a very long way of saying I just want to give them room to play so we cared more.
Yeah. And because you were mentioning Damon Wayans Jr., I wanted to talk a little bit about his character's relationship to Finn's character, Bart, because I thought it was really beautiful and very rare to see that sort of male dynamic on screen where Damon's character really is there as an emotional support to his friend throughout. It's like he's the person who made Bart go get help when he felt like he needed it. He's the person who's offering him his home and saying, stay forever, you know, at this point as well. And so just wanted to ask you a little bit about how you really wanted to construct that relationship and that friendship between the two of them, with also Damon's character being such a source of emotional support for him.
Well, I mean, similarly to like what I was talking about a few minutes ago, and just like bringing playfulness to romance and sexuality, I think that's important because we don't see it as much. But also, like, you know, not to be didactic, it looked like all the fucking toxic masculinity shit that is what the fallout from that is, and the lack of being vulnerable. And I feel like just seeing that in small levels on screen is just like important. You know, in the same way that seeing like Sean Hayes in Will and Grace in the late 90s or Ellen in the mid 90s like was important for a lot of reasons, just like in normalized things. And it's also my reality too. Like Doug, Damon's character, is very much based on, I mean, several of my friends, I mean, all of my male friends are very close and vulnerable with, most of them, but specifically my buddy Dan Levy, who I've been writing with and working with forever. You know, he is really Doug. He's got two kids. The line about, you know, I just watched my son piss in his own mouth. Like that was a thing that happened when I went to his door one day, and he's like, your life is different than mine. Um, uh, but yes, but I wanted to, you know, I wanted to see like that friendship is like really beautiful, I think. And especially like as I'm an only child. So like my family, and I have a huge like secondary family, like a lot of cousins and stuff. But my like the core of my family gets smaller and smaller, but it also expands because have so many brothers and sisters that are just people that I've known for 20 years that like, you know, can call for anything. And I think that's an important thing to show, especially, you know, I love it when they like are crying and hugging and stuff. Did that answer the question?
It did, yeah. And then I wanted to dive into talking about the relationship that you build out between Bart and Vienna when they first meet in the film, because there's such a dance between the two of them, because she has something that we learn later in the film, but she has a huge piece of information that she's withholding. And so because of that, she's very evasive with a lot of her answers. And there's a lot of basic information about herself that she doesn't share at the offset. And yet you still manage to build and construct a dynamic between the two of them where that doesn't matter to him at the beginning. And that chemistry is still the overriding thing. So how did you really think about the way in which you were going to construct that, where it still works, that he's completely into spending time with her, completely trusts her, even knowing that she's withholding information from him? And then at what point you wanted to start having that reveal in the film as well?
Um, well, I mean, I think so much of that is a credit to Zoe, and just like she's just one of the most charming actors and engaging actors that I've ever seen and worked with. I think she can do pretty much anything. So I mean, I think that she's doing a lot of the heavy lifting for me. But it was, you know, in the edit and in the directing and in the from the writing stage, it was a difficult dance because you need her to be evasive and you need her to be a little bit keeping you off balance, but you don't want an audience to think like, oh, this is just another fucking cardboard cutout, non-realized fantasy of a person and not like a fully lived in character. So that was like tough to like try to make her feel real and lived in, and that character, and not just like another male jerk off fantasy, um, while also keeping be withholding. You know what I mean? So that was like that was a thing that I was worried about, like a little bit, because as like a straight white man telling a story from the vantage point of another straight white man, I just wanted to it was a difficult thing to like make sure that she feels real and that we're invested in her and she has all the same wants and desires, because they're really like opposite sides of the same coin, right? They're both in it in varying degrees. Like um Bart's character may have been a little bit more beat up at the moment, but you know, Vienna's character is clearly in need. That's why it's kind of called Long Weekend. They're both like in search of a break. They need a vacation, a reprieve. So I just wanted to make sure that that felt um, that they just both felt like fully realized characters, that all of them did for that matter. But it was, yeah, that was kind of harder to do a little bit. But I think we pulled it off. I hope we did. And yes, I mean, in terms of like what your question is, like how, when to tease that out. I mean, it was just like a lot of cuts in the edit, because she had a couple other like monologues that I thought were beautiful and lovely and wonderful, but it was just like, we just got to get into it. And also just, you know, keep this ride moving. Cause like the way I like to think of my writing is I would just want it to be as smooth as possible, just like a smooth river stone, like no snags. You just want to get through it as fast as possible. And I think that's the most engaging read. So that was like kind of the goal in doing the movie as well. Just like keep it just rocking forward.
Was that the same dance as well that you felt like you were playing? Because she, when she does eventually share things about herself, what she shares is on the surface an unbelievable piece of information to the average person. And
Mhm.
yet as viewers, we not only have to believe her saying that, we have to believe that Finn's character Bart fully is just like, you know, we have to believe him when he believes her, essentially, at the same
Yeah.
time as well. So was that a very similar dance where a lot of it came down to like Zoe's performance and making sure that all those elements were fully realized, so that when she says this thing out loud, it feels like a real thing in the world of the film, and the suspension of disbelief works?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, again, it's a lot of just really a tribute to their performances. But I think it is also, you know, it's a little bit like the rules of cinema. Like if you just say something, you kind of believe it. It's just like, oh, this is a rule that we're doing, so you get a little bit passed for that. But I also think, well, for me, I feel like the whole movie is the twisty stuff is all analogous to falling in love, right? Because it's not logical, it's all theoretical. We can go back to, like, you know, Plato's Symposium and talk about all the different the theories on love, but they're just fucking theories. It's theoretical in the same way that, like, you know, what her backstory is, what her narrative is. It's like, well, that's not real. In the same way, like, so just logic is out the window a little bit, and it's just you have to kind of trust your instincts in the same way, because it's none of it is tangible. And I think it should feel like, anytime I've like fallen in love, it feels chaotic. It's exciting, but it's crazy because you're a little bit just like you're letting go of the wheel, and you just have to like take the leap. And I've had a bunch of different relationships. Some like, and they've all been wonderful in various degrees, but like I've definitely had like, the high school romance where it's like, oh, this is kind of bad and toxic. And I know anybody from the outside would be like, don't do that. But like, I feel it in here. Like I have to go through with this more. I don't know what that is. It's chemical to a certain degree, but you just have to trust your instincts. So I think it's again, a tribute to Zoe and Finn, but it's also like I think you want to live in his headspace as much. Like he's in every frame of the movie essentially, because you just need to be with him. You need to be falling for her as she's falling for her. You need to feel like kind of a little bit mired down in the muck when the movie starts off, because that's where he is, and then you feel this bolt of energy and excitement to the point when she says something kind of crazy and out there. You're like, ah, oh, fuck, but then also like, well, maybe, because you want it to be real, right? You want to make those excuses, and I think like there's a show that I loved forever on Netflix, BoJack Horseman. One, I think it was just had such pathos and was like, it mocked Hollywood. It was dick jokes, and it was such a real undercurrent of sadness, and that's kind of my sweet spot. But there's a line in that I think is just beautiful. That's the problem with looking at somebody with rose-colored glasses. All the red flags just look like flags. And I think that is kind of what you're doing when you're falling in love. Like all those, any errors you see, it's like any errors, any faults, any things that otherwise would be like, ooh, that might be problematic. Oh, there's this baggage. You don't give a shit. You love somebody in spite of that, right? Or you love them because of that. Like those things, they don't look like problems. They just look like things that are interesting and intriguing. So I feel like that's where you had to be with Finn and Bart's character.
Yeah. There's also a moment in the film that describes the idea of what the future looks like. And I thought it was this really beautiful monologue in the film, because essentially it doesn't matter what society is and what sports team is doing what. It's really, the idea is that people still want the same things. It's like people want to feel validated. They want to feel heard and seen in the world, and they want to feel loved, and they spend their lives trying to find those things. And that was kind of the central core of how society will always be the same, which if you look back 100 years, that's what society was back then as well. And so I was interested in how you really conceptualize that moment in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're playing with time in any way, and you always have questions about the past or the future, like what do things look like? And I remember I did a semester abroad program when I was a senior, and was lucky enough to it was on a boat and you go around the world, and it was amazing. But like that was just like a real moment of just recognizing like, oh, it doesn't matter where you are. Everybody wants the exact same shit. It might be dressed up differently, but everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants to feel like confident and loved and satisfied and happy, and like they have value. And that's kind of really it doesn't matter where you are in time or place. That's kind of what you want. And I think, I don't know, I feel like it's easy to, I mean, you look at like the things that 68 and like Woodstock in 69, and like those things that the Beatles and were singing about, and like it's all the same shit kind of, like anti-war. Or you look at like, there's, what is that? It's that monologue in Good Will Hunting, that like Matt Damon gives, talking about like, why work for the NSA? I'll tell you why, and goes on this like thing about like how I'm doing a crap job here. But anyways, I just remember watching that, like it was on some HBO or something, and like just falling into it. And I was like, God, that was 20 years ago. It's the same thing. It's like we're always doing it. It's all like a vie for power. It's more oil, it's more money, but it's really at the core of it. It's just like we all want the same shit. We just want to feel like happy and loved. I don't know, and it's just like it's I don't know, I'm tired of seeing like versions of the future that are just so pessimistic, even though it's probably more accurate. It's just like really, yeah, the circumstances might change a bit, but what we are going to want is not going to change. I don't think.
Yeah. Well, the film is such a wonderful mix of tones and with really great characters and performances. So congratulations on all of that. And thank you so
Thank you.
much for taking time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I talked for a long time. I feel like we didn't get to discuss that much, but I hope this was illuminating in some capacity.